The year was 2247 when the message arrived from the stars and humanity learned they were not alone in the universe. The transmission came from something called the Galactic Coalition, a massive alliance of over 300 species that stretched across 12 galaxies. Earth was being invited to join them, to take its place among the civilized worlds. The excitement on Earth was impossible to describe as people celebrated in the sea. Streets and governments worked day and night to prepare for first contact. Earth sent its best diplomatic team aboard a newly built exploration vessel called Horizon's Edge. Captain Daniel Price commanded the ship, a veteran of space exploration with 20 years of experience navigating the solar system. The diplomatic envoy included Ambassador Helen Murray, a skilled negotiator who had brokered peace deals between the Mars colonies and Earth governments. Colonel Jake Morrison represented Earth's military interests, a decorated officer with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. The journey to Nexus Prime, the Coalition's central station, took 3 weeks through a wormhole gateway that made Daniel's head spin with the physics of it all. When Horizon's Edge docked at Nexus Prime, the human delegation got their first real look at the galaxy beyond Earth. The station was enormous, stretching for hundreds of kilometers in all directions with docking bays that could hold ships the size of mountains. Aliens of every imaginable shape and size walked the corridors. Some had 4 arms and exoskeletons that gleamed like polished metal. Others floated through the air on waves of energy. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Helen had to force herself not to stare. The welcome ceremony was not what anyone from Earth had expected. The humans were led into a massive council chamber where representatives from the major coalition species waited. At the center sat Chairman Kelvor, a towering reptilian creature from the Drachnor species who stood nearly 9 feet tall, with scales that shimmered green and gold. His eyes were cold and calculating as he looked down at the human delegation. Around him sat the leaders of other powerful species, the Vryn with their warrior culture and 4 muscular arms, the telepathic Osari who communicated in waves of thought that made Helen's temples ache, and the heavily armored Cortan who looked like walking tanks. Ambassador Murray stepped forward and delivered the prepared speech about friendship and cooperation between species. She spoke of Earth's achievements, its culture, its desire to learn from the older civilizations of the galaxy. The alien delegates listened in polite silence, but Helen could feel the condescension radiating from them like heat. When she finished, Chairman Kelvor acknowledged Earth's petition to join the coalition with words that were technically welcoming, but felt hollow and dismissive. Then Colonel Morrison made what would turn out to be a critical mistake, though he had no way of knowing it at the time. He mentioned Earth's military capabilities and defensive forces. He spoke about training programs and special operations units that could operate in any environment. He was trying to show that Earth could contribute to the coalition's security, that humanity was not just seeking protection, but offering partnership. The reaction was immediate and humiliating. Laughter erupted throughout the council chamber. The Vryn warriors laughed the loudest, their voices booming off the walls like thunder. General Thrace, the supreme commander of Vryn military forces, stood up to his full 8 feet of height. His 4 arms crossed over his massive chest as he looked at Jake Morrison with something between amusement and pity. He asked in a voice dripping with mockery what possible military contribution humanity could offer when they had barely left their own solar system. The Vryn had been waging wars for 3,000 years across 100 worlds. What could humans possibly know about combat that the coalition had not perfected millennia ago? The Osari delegate, speaking directly into everyone's minds with her telepathy, added that she had scanned the human soldiers aboard Horizon's Edge and found their mental defenses to be almost non-existent. A child of her species could break their minds with ease. The Cortan representative pointed out that human soldiers carried primitive kinetic weapons, while coalition forces used plasma cannons and molecular disruptors. The technological gap was so vast that it was almost sad. Jake Morrison kept his face neutral despite the anger burning in his chest. Daniel Price put a hand on his shoulder in silent support. Helen Murray tried to salvage the situation with diplomatic words, but the damage was done. Earth was being dismissed as primitive and irrelevant, barely worthy of probationary membership in the coalition. General Thrace seemed to take particular pleasure in humanity's embarrassment. He proposed a challenge, speaking in a voice loud enough for the entire chamber to hear. The coalition had standard military assessments for new species, he explained. These tests were conducted on a training world called Crucible 7 and involved a series of tactical scenarios designed to evaluate military competence. Most species scored between 60 and 75% on their first attempt. The general publicly bet that no human warrior could achieve even 50%. He suggested they lower the difficulty setting so the humans would not die in the first hour. The laughter that followed was even worse than before. Chairman Kelvor, clearly enjoying the spectacle, officially issued the challenge. Earth could send one operative, just one, to complete the assessment. If the human performed adequately, Earth's military forces would be granted basic respect within the coalition. If the human failed, well, Earth would be accepted as a member species, but with the understanding that they should leave warfare to their betters. Ambassador Murray wanted to refuse the insulting challenge, but Colonel Morrison stopped her. He knew that backing down now would set the tone for Earth's entire relationship with the coalition. If humanity appeared weak or cowardly at this critical moment, they would never be taken seriously. He accepted the challenge on behalf of Earth and requested 48 hours to bring the appropriate operative to Nexus Prime. That night, aboard Horizon's Edge, Jake Morrison sent an encrypted message back to Earth Command. The message was brief and to the point. He explained the situation and made a specific request. Earth needed to send its very best operator, someone who could perform under impossible pressure and make the galaxy understand that humanity was not to be underestimated. He requested Lieutenant Ryan Carter of the Special Air Service. The response came back within 6 hours, and it was a single word that made Jake smile for the first time since the disastrous council meeting. The word was simple and clear, and it meant that Earth was taking this challenge very seriously indeed. The word was confirmed. Ryan Carter arrived at Nexus Prime exactly 47 hours after Colonel Morrison sent the request, and his arrival was everything the Galactic Coalition expected from a supposedly elite human warrior, which is to say they were thoroughly unimpressed. The transport shuttle docked in Bay 17, and Ryan walked out alone, carrying only a standard tactical backpack and wearing simple Earth tone combat fatigues that looked positively primitive compared to the advanced armor worn by Coalition soldiers. He was not a particularly large man by human standards and absolutely tiny compared to the alien warriors. Watching his arrival, Ryan stood just under 6 feet tall with a lean build that came from years of endurance training rather than bodybuilding. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his gray eyes that suggested he had seen more than most people would in several lifetimes. His dark hair was cut military short and starting to show gray at the temples, even though he was only 32 years old. Everything about him seemed utterly ordinary, and that was exactly how Ryan preferred it. Colonel Morrison met him at the docking bay along with Captain Price and Ambassador Murray. Jake shook Ryan's hand firmly and asked if he understood the situation. Ryan nodded once and said he had read the mission briefing during the flight from Earth. His voice was quiet and calm, showing no nervousness or bravado. Helen Murray found herself studying this man who was supposed to save Earth's reputation, and she worried that he seemed too normal, too small, too human to face what was coming. The pre-assessment briefing was held in a military conference room filled with coalition officers who had come to watch what they expected to be an entertaining failure. General Thrace dominated the room with his massive Vrin frame, his forearms gesturing as he explained the assessment parameters to Ryan. The testing would take place on Crucible 7, a moon that had been terraformed specifically for military training. The environment included dense jungles, rocky mountains, scorching deserts, and frozen tundra regions. Each zone contained automated defense systems, combat drones, and tactical scenarios designed to test everything from reconnaissance to direct combat. Ryan would be given basic equipment: one kinetic rifle with limited ammunition, a sidearm, a combat knife, standard tactical gear, and a 72-hour time limit to complete 12 objectives. General Thrace explained each objective in detail, clearly hoping to intimidate the human with the complexity and danger involved. There would be infiltration missions requiring stealth, target elimination scenarios demanding precision, hostage rescues needing quick thinking, and demolition tasks requiring technical knowledge. No operative had ever achieved a perfect score, and most Coalition Special Forces teams working together could only manage 8 or 9 objectives. Ryan listened in silence. his face showing no emotion as the general spoke. He asked only 3 questions during the entire briefing, and each one was purely practical. He wanted to know the atmospheric composition of Crucible 7, the acceptable rules of engagement for the combat scenarios, and whether the automated systems were programmed to kill or incapacitate. The questions revealed a mind focused entirely on mission parameters rather than glory or competition. General Thrace answered with barely concealed amusement. Captain Dax, a Vryn warrior who served under General Thrace, made several jokes during the briefing about human fragility. He suggested they should program the scenarios to easy mode, so Ryan would not die in the first engagement. Other coalition officers laughed and added their own comments. The Cortan representative wondered aloud if humans even understood basic tactical doctrine. An Osari observer commented that she could sense Ryan's thoughts and found them disappointingly simple compared to coalition warriors. The insults continued, and Ryan ignored every single one, his gray eyes fixed on the tactical display showing Crucible 7's terrain. When the briefing ended, Ryan stood and asked when the assessment would begin. General Thrace told him the dropship would depart at dawn, which was approximately 6 hours away. Ryan nodded and asked if there was a quiet place where he could prepare. Colonel Morrison led him to a small room near the docking bays and asked if he needed anything. Ryan said he was fine and asked to be left alone until departure. Jake wanted to offer encouragement or advice, but something in Ryan's expression told him that words were unnecessary. This was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. In the observation center, hundreds of coalition military personnel gathered to watch the assessment. The room was filled with holographic displays that would show multiple camera angles from Crucible 7, along with real-time data on Ryan's location, vital signs, and mission progress. General Thrace sat in the command chair with Chairman Kelvor and other high-ranking officials arranged around him. Ambassador Murray and Colonel Morrison were given seats near the back, a subtle reminder of Earth's low status in the coalition hierarchy. The atmosphere in the observation center was festive, almost party-like. Coalition officers made bets on how long Ryan would last before giving up or getting killed by the automated defenses. The consensus seemed to be that he would complete maybe 2 or 3 objectives before the 72 hours expired. Captain Dax was particularly vocal, betting that Ryan would not make it past the first infiltration scenario. The Vryn warrior had never seen a human in actual combat and assumed they must be as soft and weak as they appeared. Dawn came to Crucible 7 and the dropship descended through the moon's atmosphere with Ryan Carter as its only passenger. The ship's pilot was a Zephyr named Iris who had flown combat missions for 20 years. She had seen warriors from dozens of species attempt the assessment, and she tried to give Ryan some last-minute advice as they approached the drop zone. She told him not to be ashamed if he had to call for extraction before completing all the objectives. She said that 3 completed objectives would be respectable for a first attempt from a new species. Ryan thanked her politely and checked his equipment one final time. The rifle felt comfortable in his hands even though it was a coalition design he had only trained with for a few hours. The weight distribution was different from Earth weapons, but the basic principles were the same. Point at target, squeeze trigger, bullet goes downrange. Some things were universal regardless of which planet you came from. The dropship's rear ramp opened and hot jungle air rushed in, carrying the smell of alien vegetation and distant rain. Ryan stood at the ramp looking out at the dense canopy below. Iris called out the 30-second warning and Ryan adjusted his pack straps. At 10 seconds, he moved to the edge of the ramp. At 0, he stepped off and dropped into the jungle, his form quickly disappearing into the green shadows below. In the observation center, all eyes fixed on the displays. Ryan's first objective was 8 kilometers away through dense jungle terrain. The task was to infiltrate an enemy compound and retrieve intelligence data without triggering any alarms. Most operatives took a direct approach, using their species' natural advantages to power through obstacles. The Vryn used their strength. The Osari used telepathy to confuse sensors. The Cortan simply armored up and accepted some alarms as inevitable. The coalition observers expected Ryan to do something similar, but instead something strange happened. Within minutes of landing, Ryan completely disappeared from all satellite tracking. The thermal sensors lost him in the jungle canopy. The motion detectors picked up nothing. For 3 long hours, nobody in the observation center could find any trace of the human operative. and General Thrace began to wonder if Ryan had gotten lost or injured in the drop. The silence in the observation center grew uncomfortable as 3 hours passed. Without any sign of Ryan Carter, and General Thrace was beginning to think the human had failed before even reaching the first objective. The satellite feeds showed nothing but jungle canopy, and the automated sensors detected no movement in the target area. Captain Dax made a comment about humans getting lost in simple terrain, and several other officers laughed, though the sound was more nervous than amused. Then the display board lit up with a notification that made everyone in the room stop talking. Objective 1 was complete. The coalition observers scrambled to review the recorded footage and figure out what had happened. The compound's security logs showed no breaches, no alarms, no indication that anyone had entered or left the facility, yet the intelligence data had been accessed and copied exactly as the objective required. They rewound the surveillance feeds and watched more carefully. After several minutes of analysis, an Osari technician spotted something that made her breath catch. There for just 3 seconds on one camera feed, a shadow moved differently than the wind-blown leaves around it. That was Ryan Carter. The technical team enhanced the footage and tracked backward from that brief glimpse. They found him finally, moving through the jungle canopy like smoke, using branches and vines to travel above the ground where sensors were focused. He had approached the compound from an angle that left a blind spot between 2 sensor towers. He had waited perfectly still for 40 minutes until an automated patrol passed. He had entered through a ventilation system that was technically too small for most coalition species, but perfectly sized for a human. Inside the compound, he had avoided every camera and guard by timing his movements to their patterns. The entire infiltration had taken 2 hours and 47 minutes. General Thrace leaned forward in his command chair and studied the replay with new attention. The previous record for this objective had been set by a Vryn strike team at 5 hours and 12 minutes. This lone human had nearly cut that time in half and done it without triggering a single alarm. Thrace told himself it was luck, beginner's fortune, and that the next objective would reveal the human's limitations. The second task was target elimination in the mountain region, a scenario that required both tactical skill and marksmanship. Ryan emerged from the jungle and began climbing into the rocky highlands where the air grew thin and cold. The target was a high-value enemy commander, actually an advanced combat drone programmed to behave like a paranoid military leader. The drone was protected by automated guards and never followed the same routine twice. Most operatives tried to get close for a guaranteed kill, fighting through the guards and accepting casualties in the process. The assessment allowed for the operative to be wounded as long as they completed the objective. What Ryan did next baffled every military mind watching from the observation center. He found a position on a ridge overlooking the target area, and then he simply stopped moving. For 8 hours, Ryan lay in the same spot, barely breathing, watching through his rifle scope as the target drone moved through its randomized patterns. Coalition officers watching the feeds grew bored, and some left to get food, convinced the human was wasting time or had frozen up with fear. Colonel Morrison and Ambassador Murray watched with growing tension, wondering what Ryan was doing. Then, as the sun began to set on Crucible 7, Ryan took a single shot. The round traveled over a kilometer, fighting wind and gravity in the thin mountain air. It struck the target drone precisely through its central processor, an instant kill. The shot was so perfect that the replay analysis had to confirm 3 times that it was not a computer error. Ryan had calculated wind speed, elevation drop, air pressure, and the target's movement pattern entirely in his head. He had waited 8 hours for the one moment when all variables aligned for a guaranteed hit. The observation center erupted in shocked conversation. Captain Dax stood up from his seat and replayed the shot again, his forearms hanging limp with disbelief. An Osari combat instructor stated that the mathematics required for that shot would challenge their best computer systems. A Corton ballistics expert called it impossible and demanded to inspect Ryan's rifle for hidden technology. General Thrace said nothing, but his scaled face showed an expression that might have been respect or might have been concern. Objective 3 was hostage rescue in an urban environment, a scenario that took place in a mock city built in one of Crucible 7's desert regions. 6 hostages were held in a 3-story building, surrounded by automated guards and aerial drones. The standard approach was a coordinated assault with covering fire and acceptable hostage losses of up to 2 out of 6. Coalition doctrine accepted that some casualties were inevitable in hostage situations. Speed and aggression were valued over caution. Ryan reached the city at night, and again he did something the Coalition observers did not expect. Instead of assaulting the building, he spent hours simply watching. He mapped every guard patrol, every drone flight path, every window and door. He studied the building's structure and noted that it was built over an old drainage system. When he finally moved, it was not toward the building but to a location 3 blocks away. He planted a small explosive charge with a timer, and then disappeared into the drainage tunnels under the city. The explosion went off exactly at midnight, creating a large fireball and triggering every alarm in the sector. Automated guards rushed toward the blast site. Aerial drones converged on the location. In the confusion, nobody noticed 6 hostages being led through underground tunnels to a safe extraction point half a kilometer away. By the time Coalition observers realized what had happened, Ryan and all 6 hostages were clear of the danger zone. 0 casualties, 0 direct engagement with enemy forces. Mission complete. Ambassador Murray found herself smiling despite the tension. Colonel Morrison allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. In the command chair, General Thrace's tail was twitching, a Vryn sign of agitation. This human was not fighting like any warrior the Coalition had ever assessed. He was not trying to prove his strength or skill. He was simply completing objectives in the most efficient way possible, without ego, without glory-seeking, without unnecessary risk. It was completely alien to Coalition military culture. The missions continued and Ryan maintained his perfect record. Objective 4 was demolition, Objective 5 was reconnaissance, Objective 6 was survival in extreme cold. Each time, Ryan used minimal resources and maximum intelligence. He treated ammunition like precious gold, taking only shots that he knew would count. He avoided fights that were not necessary. He used the environment itself as a weapon, triggering rock slides to eliminate drone patrols and starting small fires to create smoke screens. By the 48th hour, Ryan had completed 10 of 12 objectives, and the observation center had gone from mocking to silent respect. Captain Dax no longer made jokes. The Osari observers were fascinated by what they called Ryan's tactical consciousness, a way of thinking that was entirely focused on mission completion rather than personal glory. Even Chairman Kelvor had joined General Thrace in the command chair to watch this unprecedented performance. Ryan was exhausted now, his movements showing the strain of 2 days with minimal sleep. He had a minor injury to his left leg from a fall in the mountain region. His ammunition was almost gone, down to his last rifle magazine and 3 rounds for his sidearm. His food and water were depleted. Any reasonable person would accept that 10 completed objectives was already a record and call for extraction. The Coalition command sent him a message offering exactly that, praising his performance and suggesting he withdraw with honors. Ryan's response came through the communication system in that same quiet, calm voice. He thanked them for the offer and declined. He stated simply that he was continuing the mission. Colonel Morrison felt pride surge through his chest. Ambassador Murray closed her eyes and said a silent prayer. General Thrace's tail stopped twitching and he leaned forward to watch what would happen next. The final 2 objectives were designed to be nearly impossible for a single operative. They took place in a fortified compound built into a cliff face overlooking a frozen wasteland. The compound held hostages in 3 separate buildings, each guarded by heavy automated defenses and patrol drones. The scenario was designed for a full strike team with air support and heavy weapons. Attempting it alone was considered suicide by Coalition standards. Every species that had tried this final challenge solo had either failed or died in the attempt. Ryan stood at the edge of the frozen zone, looking across the wasteland at the distant compound. His breath formed clouds in the freezing air and his injured leg ached with every step. He checked his remaining ammunition one more time and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to rest. Then he started moving toward what everyone watching assumed would be his inevitable failure. The frozen wasteland stretched before Ryan Carter like a white hell, wind howling across ice and snow with temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The fortified compound was barely visible through the blizzard conditions, a dark shape against the white landscape built into the cliff face like a fortress. Ryan moved forward slowly, using the terrain features to shield himself from the worst of the wind, and the Coalition observers watched in tense silence as he began what they all assumed was an impossible task. What happened over the next 6 hours would be studied in coalition military academies. For decades to come, Ryan did not approach the compound directly, but instead began a methodical reconnaissance that seemed to take forever. He moved through the blizzard like a ghost, finding positions where he could observe without being seen. He studied the patrol patterns of the automated drones. He noted the power fluctuations in the compound's shields. He mapped every sensor tower and defensive position. He was building a complete picture of the enemy's strengths and weaknesses, and he was doing it with the patience of someone who understood that rushing meant death. The observation center had grown crowded as word spread through Nexus Prime that a human was attempting the impossible final scenario. Military officers from dozens of species filled the room, standing shoulder to shoulder to watch the displays. General Thrace had stopped making any comments at all, his forearms crossed as he studied Ryan's every move. Chairman Kelvor had called in his senior staff to witness what was happening. Even species that normally had little interest in military matters had sent observers to see if the human could really achieve a perfect score. Ryan spent an hour just watching the compound's power generator, a fusion reactor that provided energy to the shields and automated defenses. He noticed something that the scenario designers had probably never expected anyone to catch. The generator had a slight fluctuation in its output every 7 minutes, a tiny power dip that lasted exactly 30 seconds. It was barely noticeable and would not affect the compound's combat effectiveness. But Ryan saw it and understood what it meant. Those 30-second windows were when the shield coverage would be at its weakest. He timed the fluctuations precisely and confirmed the pattern repeated like clockwork. Then he began moving, using the blizzard as cover and timing his approach to coincide with the power dips. When the shields weakened, he slipped through gaps that would not exist at full power. When they strengthened, he froze in place and let the snow cover him. It took 3 full cycles to get close to the compound. 90 minutes of patient movement through killing cold. The compound had 3 buildings arranged in a triangular formation, each one holding hostages behind automated defenses. The scenario rules stated that all hostages had to be extracted within a 4-hour window, or they would be executed. Most strike teams tried to hit all 3 buildings simultaneously, accepting heavy casualties but ensuring speed. Ryan was alone and could not be in 3 places at once, so he had to think differently. He reached the compound's outer wall and used his last explosive charge to create a small breach in a maintenance tunnel. The explosion was small and precisely placed, barely audible over the howling wind. He slipped inside and found himself in the compound's service corridors, the unglamorous tunnels that carried power and water and waste. Coalition military doctrine rarely considered these spaces tactically important, but Ryan had learned long ago that every building has veins and arteries that keep it alive. In the first building, Ryan encountered 2 automated guard units. He had exactly 4 rounds left in his rifle and 3 in his sidearm, 7 bullets total for an unknown number of targets. He could not afford a firefight. Instead, he waited in the shadows until the first guard passed, then used his combat knife to disable its sensors before it could raise an alarm. The second guard he avoided entirely, timing his movement to its patrol pattern. He reached the hostages, 2 coalition civilians programmed to act terrified and used hand signals to keep them quiet. He led them out through the service tunnels, retracing his path. The second building required different tactics because his earlier entry had been detected and security was now elevated. Ryan could see on the compound's internal monitors that guards were searching for intruders. He needed a distraction and he needed it fast. He found the compound's communications relay and used his basic technical knowledge to create a feedback loop that would look like a system malfunction. Alarms started blaring in the wrong sections of the compound. Automated guards rushed to investigate phantom threats. In the confusion, Ryan entered the second building, extracted 2 more hostages, and disappeared back into the service tunnels. For the third building, Ryan's options were running out. Security was at maximum alert. His ammunition was down to 3 pistol rounds. His body was screaming with exhaustion and cold. The hostages in the third building were in the most heavily defended position, and every automated system in the compound was now actively searching for him. In the observation center, several coalition officers were already calling the attempt a failure despite Ryan's incredible performance so far. You could not save 2/3 of the hostages and call it a success. Ryan had one advantage that he had not yet used: his knowledge of structural engineering from demolition training. He had noticed during his reconnaissance that the third building was built against the cliff face, and that the rock behind it showed signs of stress fractures. The compound designers had probably assumed the cliff was solid, but Ryan saw the weakness. He used his last 3 pistol rounds not to fight guards but to shoot precisely placed points in the building's support structure. The carefully aimed shots combined with the natural stress in the rock created a cascade failure. Part of the building's exterior wall collapsed, not catastrophically but enough to create chaos and trigger emergency protocols. Automated guards rushed to secure the breach. In the confusion of alarms and shifting priorities, Ryan entered through the damaged section, reached the final 2 hostages, and led them out through a gap in the cliff face that had opened from the structural failure. 43 minutes after entering the compound, Ryan emerged from the frozen zone with all 6 hostages alive and safe. He had completed both final objectives. Perfect score. Every mission accomplished. 0 failed tasks. The 72-hour time limit still had over 4 hours remaining. Ryan Carter had done what no coalition operative had ever done. He had achieved absolute perfection on the Crucible 7 assessment. The observation center exploded with noise. Officers from dozens of species were shouting, arguing, demanding to review the footage. General Thrace stood from his command chair, his massive frame trembling with an emotion that might have been rage or might have been awe. Captain Dax was replaying the final compound assault over and over, trying to understand how a single human with no ammunition and minimal equipment had outsmarted every defensive system. The Osari observers were in telepathic conference, their minds linked as they tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. Chairman Kelvor raised one clawed hand, and silence fell across the observation center. He spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority, and stated that Ryan Carter's performance would be verified by independent review before any official determination was made. But everyone in the room already knew the truth. The human had not just passed the assessment, he had shattered every record and redefined what was possible. Ryan was extracted from Crucible 7 by emergency medical shuttle. He had a mild case of hypothermia, the leg injury that had gotten worse, severe dehydration and exhaustion that would have killed a lesser man. The medics, a team of Zephyr specialists, treated him with a mixture of professional efficiency and barely concealed amazement. They had treated thousands of coalition warriors over the years, but never one who had pushed themselves this far on willpower alone. When Ryan was stable enough to be moved, he was brought to Nexus Prime's medical facility for observation. Colonel Morrison and Ambassador Murray were waiting there, along with Captain Price, who had tears in his eyes that he did not bother to hide. Jake Morrison shook Ryan's hand and told him that he had done Earth proud. Ryan, lying in a medical bed with various alien instruments monitoring his vital signs, just nodded and said he had done his job. The official review took 18 hours and involved military experts from 7 different coalition species. They analyzed every second of footage, every decision Ryan had made, every tactic he had employed. They looked for evidence of cheating or hidden technology. They found nothing but exceptional training, tactical brilliance, and a mindset that was completely foreign to coalition military culture. The final report confirmed what everyone already knew. Lieutenant Ryan Carter of Earth's Special Air Service had achieved a perfect score on the Crucible 7 assessment. General Thrace personally delivered the report to Chairman Kelvor in front of the full Coalition Council. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. A wariness that came from having his worldview fundamentally shaken. He stated the facts clearly. The human had completed all 12 objectives, had done so in record time. The council chamber was packed with representatives from hundreds of worlds when Chairman Kelvor called the special session to order, and the atmosphere had changed completely from the mocking dismissal of just days earlier. Now there was curiosity mixed with wariness as coalition species tried to understand what Ryan Carter's performance meant for the balance of power in the galaxy. Ambassador Murray sat in the human delegation section with Colonel Morrison and Captain Price, while Ryan stood at attention near the center of the chamber, still moving stiffly from his injuries but refusing to show weakness. Chairman Kelvor began by formally acknowledging Earth's military capabilities and stating that humanity had proven itself worthy of full membership in the coalition, rather than the probationary status originally offered. The political implications rippled through the chamber, as various species realized that Earth had just jumped several levels in the coalition hierarchy through a single operative's performance. General Thrace stood to address the council, and his voice carried none of the mockery from before. He stated that Ryan Carter's tactics would be studied and potentially integrated into coalition military training. Several Vrin officers in the audience shifted uncomfortably at the idea of learning from humans. Then the Osari delegate, a female named Lyra, who served as one of the coalition's chief military psychologists, requested permission to speak. She had been studying the recordings of Ryan's assessment, with particular interest in his mental state during the missions. What she revealed sent a chill through the chamber. Lyra explained that she had analyzed Ryan's thought patterns through the faint telepathic echoes that all sentient beings leave behind. She said that his mind during combat was unlike anything she had encountered in 300 years of studying warriors. Coalition fighters, Lyra explained, typically showed thought patterns dominated by concepts of glory, victory, and proving strength. Even in the most disciplined warriors, there was an element of ego and competition. But Ryan's mind had shown none of that. His thoughts were pure calculation and adaptation. He was not trying to win or prove anything. He was simply focused on completing the mission with maximum efficiency and minimum risk. Every decision was weighed for its practical value, not its glory. Every life, including his own and the simulated hostages, was treated as precious and worth preserving. The Osari delegate's words hung in the air as coalition officers absorbed what she was saying. Captain Dax, the Vrin warrior who had mocked Ryan before the assessment, stood and asked the question many were thinking. If one human could perform at this level, what did that mean for Earth's military as a whole? Colonel Morrison seized the opportunity and requested permission to address the council. When granted, he walked to the center of the chamber and spoke with quiet confidence. Jake Morrison explained that Ryan Carter, while exceptional, was not unique among human special forces. The SAS was one of several elite units on Earth. There were the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Marine Raiders, Army Rangers, and those were just from the United States. Other nations had their own elite units: the British SBS, Russian Spetsnaz, Israeli Sayeret Matkal, and dozens more. Each unit had different specializations, but all were trained to the same basic philosophy of efficiency, adaptability, and mission completion above personal glory. The implications of Morrison's words were staggering. If Earth had thousands of operators trained to think and fight like Ryan Carter, they represented a military force unlike anything the coalition had encountered. General Thrace interrupted to ask how long this training took. Morrison answered that basic special forces training took years, and that operators like Ryan had usually served a decade or more before reaching their peak capability. The investment in time and resources was enormous, but the results spoke for themselves. Ambassador Murray watched as the political dynamics in the chamber shifted visibly. Species that had dismissed Earth days ago were now calculating how to form alliances. Others were clearly worried about the potential threat humanity posed. Several delegates were whispering among themselves about requesting cross-training programs with human special forces. Murray realized that Earth had gained something more valuable than membership in the coalition. They had gained respect and leverage. The debate was suddenly interrupted by an urgent alert that flooded through the chamber's communication systems. Chairman Kelvor received a priority message, and his scaled face showed alarm as he read it. He immediately called for silence and announced that the Krell, a hostile insectoid species that had been raiding coalition territory for decades, had just launched a major attack. They had struck the mining colony at Outpost Vega, overwhelming the small security force and taking over 200 coalition civilians hostage. The information kept getting worse as reports came in. The Krell were demanding that the coalition withdraw from 3 contested star systems, or they would begin executing hostages. They had fortified their position in the outpost's underground tunnel network, making any conventional assault nearly impossible. The hostages included families of high-ranking coalition officials, scientists working on classified projects, and children. The political and emotional pressure on the council was immediate and intense. General Thrace called an emergency military session, and every tactical expert in the coalition gathered to analyze the situation. Ryan Carter was invited to attend as a courtesy, though nobody expected meaningful input from someone who had just completed an exhausting assessment. The tactical display showed Outpost Vega in detail. a mining colony built into and beneath an asteroid, with kilometers of tunnel networks that the Krell now controlled. The hostages were scattered across multiple locations deep underground. The coalition military ran simulation after simulation, and every single one showed the same devastating result. Any rescue attempt would result in massive hostage casualties, with projections ranging from 60 to 80% losses. The Krell were dug in too deep, had too many choke points covered, and had explicitly stated they would kill hostages the moment they detected any assault force. The automated defenses they had set up in the tunnels would detect any approach by coalition forces. General Thrace proposed a full assault, accepting the projected casualties as unavoidable. The Vryn military philosophy held that some loss of life was acceptable to achieve victory and destroy the enemy. The Osari representatives argued for negotiation, suggesting they could use their telepathy to influence the Krell leaders. The Cortan military commander recommended orbital bombardment to deny the enemy their prize, arguing that dead hostages were preferable to surrendering territory. Each option was worse than the last, and Chairman Kelvor faced an impossible choice. Ryan Carter had been sitting quietly in the corner of the strategy room, listening to the debate while studying the tactical displays. His injuries ached and he was still recovering from Crucible 7, but his mind was working through the problem with the same methodical approach he applied to every mission. Finally, he stood and cleared his throat. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at the human who had just accomplished the impossible. Ryan asked for permission to speak, and Chairman Kelvor granted it immediately. Ryan walked to the tactical display and began pointing out details that the coalition planners had overlooked. He noted that the Krell tunnel defenses were designed to detect large groups and heavy weapons, not small teams moving quietly. He observed that the hostage locations, while scattered, followed a pattern based on the tunnel network's original mining structure. He identified ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels that were too small for most coalition species, but perfectly sized for humans. Then Ryan proposed an alternative: a small team of 6 operatives using human special forces tactics, rapid insertion through an abandoned mining shaft, use of the Krell's own tunnel network against them, minimal engagement to avoid alerting guards, and extraction within 12 hours. The plan was audacious and dangerous, but Ryan outlined it with such calm confidence that several coalition officers found themselves actually believing it might work. General Thrace immediately objected, saying the plan was suicide and that the Krell position was far more complex than any training scenario on Crucible 7. Real lives were at stake, not simulated hostages. The risks were too great to bet on human tactics that the coalition barely understood. Other officers voiced similar concerns. The chamber erupted in argument as different factions debated the merits of Ryan's proposal versus the conventional assault. Chairman Kelvor raised his hand for silence and asked Ryan directly if he believed this mission could succeed. Ryan met the chairman's eyes and answered with brutal honesty. He said that he could not guarantee success because no military operation came with guarantees, but he believed the plan had a better chance of saving lives than any of the alternatives being discussed. He said that if the coalition was willing to accept 60% casualties with a conventional assault, they should at least consider a plan that might achieve 0 casualties. The logic was sound, but it required the coalition to trust human tactics and human judgment. Chairman Kelvor looked around the chamber at the assembled military leadership. He saw doubt and fear, but also a dawning realization that The preparation room was filled with tension as Ryan Carter briefed his newly assembled team on human small unit tactics, and he had 8 hours to teach coalition warriors methods that took Earth's special forces years to master. Captain Dax stood at attention with his 4 massive arms crossed, clearly struggling with the concept of taking orders from someone half his size. Ken, the Osari infiltrator, watched with his large dark eyes and communicated occasional questions through gentle telepathic pulses. Vorn, the Cortan demolitions expert, kept checking and rechecking his equipment with nervous energy. Iris, the Zephyr pilot, studied the tactical maps with professional focus. Lisa Grant, the only other human in the room, gave Ryan a slight nod of understanding. Ryan began by explaining that everything they knew about coalition warfare needed to be set aside for this mission. Speed and overwhelming force would get the hostages killed. Technology and advanced weapons would trigger the Krell sensors. Instead, they would rely on patience, silence, and using the environment as their greatest weapon. He taught them hand signals for communication since radio chatter could be detected. He showed them how to move quietly, how to control their breathing, how to wait in absolute stillness when necessary. Captain Dax was the most challenging student because Vryn warrior culture emphasized aggressive action and visible displays of strength. The idea of hiding and waiting went against every instinct he had. Ryan put him through a simple exercise: move across the room without making any sound. Dax tried, and his heavy footfalls echoed despite his best efforts. Ryan showed him how to distribute weight differently, how to test each step before committing, how to use his forearms for balance. It took 2 hours of practice before Dax could cross the room in near silence. Ken adapted quickly because Osari already valued subtlety and psychological warfare. His telepathic abilities gave him an advantage in sensing danger before it appeared. Ryan taught him to use that gift not to attack enemy minds but to avoid detection entirely. Vorn learned how to use minimal explosives for maximum effect, placing charges with surgical precision rather than the Corton preference for overwhelming destructive power. Iris absorbed everything like a sponge, her pilot's instincts translating well to tactical thinking. Lisa Grant served as Ryan's assistant instructor and demonstrated techniques that the coalition team found remarkable. She showed them how to estimate distances without technology, how to read environmental clues for danger, how to remain calm under pressure. The coalition warriors realized they were not just learning tactics but an entire philosophy of warfare that valued intelligence over strength. With 4 hours remaining before mission launch, Ryan laid out the full operational plan. They would insert through an abandoned mining shaft 3 kilometers from the Krell position. The shaft was old and unstable, which was why the Krell had not bothered to guard it. They would move through the tunnel network using maintenance passages that were too small for the insectoid Krell warriors, but accessible to the team. They would avoid engagement whenever possible because every fight risked alerting the enemy. The hostages were held in 3 separate chambers deep in the tunnel complex. The team would split into 3 pairs. Ryan and Lisa would take the western chamber, Dax and Vorn would take the central chamber, and Ken and Iris would take the eastern chamber. They would coordinate their assault for exactly 400 hours local time, striking when the Krell were at their lowest alert level, based on intelligence suggesting they followed a sleep cycle. Each pair reviewed their specific objectives. Ryan emphasized that the mission was not about killing Krell, but about saving lives. If they could extract the hostages without firing a shot, that would be perfect. If they had to fight, they would do so only as much as necessary to complete the mission. This concept of minimum necessary force was alien to coalition thinking, but the team members were starting to understand the logic. The mission was designated Operation Darkfall, and the name seemed appropriate, given that they would be operating in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. The team boarded a stealth transport that Iris would pilot to the insertion point. The flight through space toward Outpost Vega took 90 minutes, and during that time Ryan had the team run through the plan 3 more times until everyone could recite their role without thinking. General Thrace and Chairman Kelvor watched from the command center back at Nexus Prime, monitoring what little telemetry would be available once the team went underground. The observation room was crowded again with coalition officials who had gathered to witness either a brilliant success or a tragic failure. Ambassador Murray sat with Colonel Morrison, both of them silent with worry. They had faith in Ryan, but the stakes were impossibly high. The stealth transport approached Outpost Vega from the dark side, using the asteroid's mass to shield from Krell sensors. Iris executed a perfect silent approach, her piloting skills evident in every micro-correction. They docked at the abandoned mining shaft without triggering any alarms. The team disembarked with minimal equipment, suppressed weapons, basic supplies, night vision gear, and communication devices set to burst transmission only. Ryan led them into the shaft, and immediately the temperature dropped to near freezing. The tunnel was dark and unstable, with sections that looked like they might collapse at any moment. This was why the Krell had not bothered to guard it, assuming no one would be foolish enough to use such a dangerous approach. Ryan moved forward carefully, testing each step, and the team followed in single file. 2 hours into the insertion, they encountered their first major obstacle. A section of tunnel had partially collapsed, leaving a gap barely large enough for a human to squeeze through but impossible for the larger coalition species. Dax looked at the gap with frustration, his massive Vrin frame clearly too big to fit. Ryan assessed the situation quickly and made a decision. He used a small amount of Vorn's explosive to carefully widen the gap, just enough for Dax to squeeze through. The explosion was tiny and shaped to direct force away from the Krell positions, but every member of the team held their breath waiting for alarms. None came. They continued deeper into the asteroid, following Ryan's navigation based on the mining colony's original schematics. The tunnels were a maze, but Ryan seemed to have memorized every turn and junction. Ken reached out with his telepathic senses and detected Krell mines in the distance, their thoughts aggressive and alien. He warned the team, and they adjusted their route to avoid the patrol. 4 hours into the mission, they reached the branch point where they would split into 3 pairs. Ryan gathered the team one last time and went over the timing. Each pair would reach their assigned chamber, assess the situation, and wait for his signal. At exactly 0400 hours, they would all strike simultaneously. The coordination had to be perfect because if one team moved too early, the Krell would execute hostages in the other locations. Ryan synchronized everyone's timepieces and made eye contact with each team member. He saw determination in Dax's alien features, focus in Ken's dark eyes, readiness in Vorn's heavy frame, confidence in Iris's expression, and steady calm in Lisa's face. They were as prepared as they could be. He gave the signal and the team split up, each pair disappearing into different tunnels. Ryan and Lisa moved through the western tunnels with absolute silence. They encountered a Krell patrol and Ryan signaled to freeze. They pressed themselves into alcoves in the tunnel wall and waited as 3 insectoid warriors passed within arm's reach. The Krell were 7 feet tall with chitinous armor and multiple limbs carrying advanced weapons. Their compound eyes scanned the darkness, but they walked past the hidden humans without detecting anything. When the patrol passed, Ryan and Lisa continued until they reached a position overlooking their target chamber. Through a ventilation grate, they could see 15 hostages huddled together, guarded by 5 Krell warriors. The chamber had 2 entrances and limited cover. Ryan studied the layout and formulated a plan. He noted that one of the Krell guards walked a predictable pattern every 3 minutes. Another was positioned near a support beam that looked structurally questionable. Lisa set up her sniper rifle and found angles for 2 clean shots. Ryan positioned himself near the ventilation shaft, ready to drop in when the moment came. They waited for 0400 hours, weapons ready, breathing controlled, minds focused. In other parts of the tunnel complex, Dax and Vorn were in position at the central chamber, while Ken and Iris waited at the eastern chamber. The entire operation hung on perfect timing and flawless execution. Ryan checked his timepiece and counted down the final seconds. The final seconds before 0400 hours stretched like hours as Ryan Carter watched his timepiece and felt his heartbeat slow to the calm rhythm that came from years of training. Lisa Grant lay beside him with her rifle positioned for the shot, her breathing steady and controlled. Through the ventilation grate below them, the Krell guards moved through their patterns, unaware that death waited in the shadows above. Ryan raised his hand and counted down silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. At exactly 0400 hours, Operation Darkfall went from planning to execution. Ryan dropped through the ventilation shaft with his suppressed pistol already aimed at the nearest Krell guard. Lisa fired twice in rapid succession, each shot precisely placed to drop guards before they could raise an alarm. Ryan's pistol coughed twice more and 4 Krell warriors fell in less than 3 seconds. The 5th guard turned toward the commotion, but Ryan was already moving, closing the distance and using his combat knife to ensure silence. The hostages, 15 coalition civilians, including 3 children, stared in shock as 2 humans appeared from nowhere and eliminated their guards with brutal efficiency. Ryan immediately signaled for silence and spoke in a calm voice, telling them they were being rescued and needed to follow instructions exactly. Lisa was already checking the exits to make sure no other Krell had heard the brief engagement. The entire assault had taken less than 10 seconds. In the central chamber, Captain Dax was learning firsthand what human tactics meant in practice. He had wanted to charge in with weapons blazing, trusting his Vrin strength and armor to overwhelm the enemy. Instead, Vorn had placed a small-shaped charge on the chamber's power junction, and when it detonated, the lights went out. In the darkness, Dax used his forearms and superior strength to quietly disable 3 Krell guards, while Vorn handled the other 2 with precise strikes. The 12 hostages in that chamber never even saw their rescuers clearly, only felt strong hands guiding them toward the exit. Ken and Iris faced a different challenge in the eastern chamber because the Krell commander had positioned himself there with enhanced security. 8 guards watched over 18 hostages, and the commander himself was a massive insectoid warrior with battle scars and tactical intelligence. Ken reached out with his telepathic abilities, not to attack but to sense the Krell commander's thoughts and predict his reactions. Iris used her technical skills to trigger a minor malfunction in the chamber's environmental systems, creating a hissing sound that drew the commander's attention to the wrong part of the room. When the assault came at 0400 hours, it was perfectly coordinated chaos. Iris dropped from an overhead maintenance tunnel and threw a flashbang grenade, a human weapon that the Krell had never encountered. The intense light and sound overwhelmed the insectoid warrior's compound eyes and sensitive antennae. Ken moved through the confusion like a shadow, using his small frame and telepathic awareness to avoid the blind fire from disoriented guards. Within 30 seconds, all 8 Krell warriors were down, and the commander was unconscious from a precisely placed stun shot. Ryan received confirmation signals from both teams that their chambers were secure. The hard part was done, but now came the dangerous phase, extracting over 40 hostages through hostile territory, while the Krell discovered their missing guards and raised the alarm. Ryan gathered his 15 hostages and began leading them through the maintenance tunnels, moving slowly because several of the civilians were injured or elderly. Lisa took rear guard position watching for pursuit. They had made it 200 meters when the alarms started blaring throughout the tunnel complex. The Krell had discovered the rescue and were mobilizing their forces. Ryan heard heavy footfalls echoing through the tunnels as search parties spread out. He signaled his group to freeze and they pressed into a side passage, barely breathing as a Krell patrol rushed past. One of the children started to cry and Ryan gently placed a hand over the child's mouth, making eye contact to convey calm and safety. The patrol passed without detecting them. Captain Dax was having a harder time moving his group quietly because the 12 hostages included several Corton civilians whose heavy frames made stealth difficult. He found himself adapting Ryan's teachings on the fly, using his strength to help the heavier individuals move more quietly. Vorn placed small charges at strategic junctions behind them, not to kill pursuing Krell but to collapse tunnels and slow their advance. The Corton was starting to appreciate the elegance of using minimal force for maximum effect. Ken and Iris had the largest group of hostages and the longest distance to travel. They were also closest to the Krell main force, which was now mobilizing in response to the alarm. Ken sensed hundreds of hostile minds converging on their position, and he told Iris they needed to change routes. She pulled up the tunnel schematics on her portable display and found an alternative path through an old mining gallery that was marked as unstable. It was risky, but staying on the planned route meant running directly into Krell reinforcements. The 3 teams were converging on the extraction point through different routes, and Ryan was coordinating their movements. Through burst transmissions that lasted only milliseconds, he could see on his tactical display that Ken and Iris were taking the longest route and would arrive last. He made a decision that Lisa immediately understood. They would not leave anyone behind. Ryan and his group reached the extraction point first, and he positioned them in a defensive formation, then took Lisa and went back into the tunnels to provide covering fire for the other teams. Dax and Vorn's group arrived next, moving faster now that they could hear Krell patrols getting closer. Dax was surprised to see Ryan had come back instead of evacuating with his own group. The Vryn warrior understood in that moment what separated human special forces from coalition military doctrine. They never left anyone behind, even when tactical logic suggested abandoning slower elements. Ken and Iris emerged from the unstable mining gallery with their 18 hostages, just as a Krell patrol spotted them. The insectoid warriors opened fire with plasma weapons that lit up the tunnel like lightning. Iris returned fire with her rifle, while Ken used his telepathy to create confusion in the Krell minds, making them see threats that were not there. Ryan and Lisa added their weapons to the fight, suppressed shots picking off Krell with surgical precision. Vorn saw his opportunity and placed his last explosive charge on a support beam that held up the tunnel ceiling. He waited until all the hostages were past that point, then detonated the charge. The tunnel collapsed behind them, cutting off the Krell pursuit but also eliminating their planned escape route. They would have to use the backup extraction point that was another half-kilometer away, through even more dangerous territory. The combined group, now over 40 hostages and 6 operators, moved as quickly as possible toward the backup extraction point. Ryan could hear Krell forces attempting to flank them through parallel tunnels. He sent Dax and Vorn ahead to secure the extraction point while he, Lisa, Ken, and Iris provided rear guard. The 4 of them established a defensive position at a tunnel junction and prepared to hold off the Krell long enough for the hostages to escape. The Krell came in waves, their numbers overwhelming but their tactics predictable. They charged forward with weapons firing, assuming their superior numbers would prevail. Instead, they ran into a disciplined defense that picked them apart with precise fire. Ryan called targets and coordinated fields of fire. Lisa's sniper rifle dropped Krell commanders before they could organize their troops. Ken used telepathy to predict enemy movements and warn the team. Iris's technical knowledge let her trigger environmental hazards that slowed the Krell advance. But ammunition was running low, and the Krell kept coming. Ryan made the calculation that they had bought enough time and ordered a fighting retreat. The 4 operators fell back by pairs, covering each other as they moved toward the extraction point. A Krell plasma bolt caught Ken in the shoulder and he went down hard. Iris grabbed him without hesitation and hauled him toward safety while Ryan and Lisa covered them. They reached the extraction point where Dax and Vorn had all the hostages loaded onto the stealth transport. Iris was already firing up the engines as the last operator scrambled aboard. Krell warriors were pouring into the chamber, weapons blazing. Ryan was the last one through the hatch, and he felt the ship lurch as Iris executed an emergency launch. Plasma bolts scored the hull, but the transport's shields held. The flight back to Nexus Prime took 2 hours, and during that time the team treated Ken's wound and checked on the hostages. All 45 civilians were accounted for and alive. The injuries were minor, mostly bruises and exhaustion. The mission was a complete success. Every hostage rescued, minimal casualties to the rescue team, and the Krell forces denied their leverage. When the transport docked at Nexus Prime, the team emerged to find General Thrace and Chairman Kelvor waiting with what looked like the entire Coalition Council. The observation center had watched everything through the limited telemetry and helmet cameras. They had seen human tactics and Coalition warriors working together to achieve what conventional assault would never have accomplished. The aftermath of Operation Darkfall transformed Nexus Prime in ways that went far beyond the successful rescue of 45 hostages, and within hours of the team's return, requests were flooding in from Coalition species who wanted to learn human special warfare tactics. The observation center footage had been distributed to military commands across the galaxy, and what they saw challenged everything the Coalition thought they knew about combat. Captain Dax became an unexpected advocate, giving detailed debriefings about how Ryan Carter's methods had succeeded where conventional tactics would have failed catastrophically. General, Thrace called an emergency session of the military council, and his attitude had shifted completely from the mocking dismissal of days earlier. He stood before assembled officers from dozens of species and acknowledged what many were thinking, but few wanted to say aloud. The Coalition's military doctrine had grown stagnant over centuries of relying on technological superiority and overwhelming force. Humanity brought something new, a philosophy of warfare that valued intelligence and adaptability over raw power. The general proposed immediate integration of human tactical training into Coalition military academies. The proposal met resistance from traditionalists who argued that Coalition species should not abandon methods that had worked for millennia. A Cortan admiral pointed out that their heavy assault tactics had won countless battles, and that human methods might work for small operations, but could not replace conventional warfare. An Osari commander questioned whether other species could even learn to think like humans, given the fundamental differences in psychology and culture. The debate raged for hours with passionate arguments on both sides. Ryan Carter sat quietly through most of the debate until Chairman Kelvor asked for his perspective. Ryan stood and addressed the council with his characteristic calm. He explained that he was not suggesting the Coalition abandon their existing strengths, but rather add new tools to their capabilities. Vryn warriors would always have superior strength. Osari would always have telepathy. Corton would always have heavy armor and firepower. Human tactics were meant to complement those advantages, not replace them. He emphasized that the goal was not to make everyone fight like humans, but to teach principles that could be adapted to each species' natural abilities. The argument that finally swayed the council came from an unexpected source. Ken, the Osari infiltrator who had been wounded during the rescue, spoke through telepathic projection that reached everyone in the chamber. He shared his memories of the operation, letting the council experience what it felt like to work with human tactics. They felt the patience of waiting for the perfect moment, the discipline of using minimum force, the absolute focus on mission completion over personal glory. The shared experience was more powerful than any words could convey. Chairman Kelvor made his decision and announced that Earth would be granted full coalition membership with immediate effect. Furthermore, humanity would be invited to establish a joint training facility where human instructors could teach special operations doctrine to coalition volunteers. The political implications were enormous because this effectively elevated Earth from newcomer species to strategic partner. Ambassador Murray negotiated the formal terms over the next week, securing agreements that gave Earth access to coalition technology, trading rights, and defensive treaties. But perhaps more important than the political changes were the personal transformations happening throughout Nexus Prime. Captain Dax requested assignment as a permanent liaison to human military forces, wanting to continue learning from Ryan and eventually bring those lessons back to the Vryn warrior culture. Vorn started developing new demolition techniques that combined Corton explosive power with human precision. Iris began designing stealth craft that incorporated the infiltration principles she had learned. Ken, while recovering from his injury, started teaching other Osari how to use their telepathy for detection avoidance rather than direct attack. The formal recognition ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of Nexus Prime with representatives from over 300 species in attendance. Ryan Carter stood at attention in his dress uniform while Chairman Kelvor presented him with the Star of Valor, the Coalition's highest military honor. The medal was a crystalline structure that shimmered with inner light, and it had been awarded fewer than 100 times in Coalition history. Ryan accepted it with quiet dignity, his face showing none of the pride or arrogance that often accompanied such honors. When asked to give an acceptance speech, Ryan kept it brief because grand words had never been his strength. He simply stated that he had done his job, and that was what humanity had always done throughout its history. Humans adapted to challenges, overcame obstacles, and completed missions not for glory, but because the work needed to be done. He thanked the Coalition for the opportunity to prove Earth's worth, and expressed hope that future cooperation would benefit all species. The assembled delegates rose in applause, a gesture of respect that crossed cultural and species boundaries. General Thrace, standing in the front row, turned to a fellow Vryn officer and spoke words that would be quoted throughout Coalition space for years to come. He said that Galactic Command had laughed at Earth's warriors and that they would never make that mistake again. The other Vryn nodded in agreement, having learned through painful experience that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or physical abilities, but their capacity to think, adapt, and refuse to quit. In the weeks that followed, the joint training facility was established on a neutral moon designated as Outpost Harmony. Human instructors arrived from Earth, bringing with them operators from the SAS, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, and other elite units. Coalition volunteers poured in, eager to learn these new methods. The training was brutal, and many Coalition warriors struggled with concepts that went against their cultural conditioning. But those who persevered found themselves becoming more effective operators, combining their species' natural advantages with human tactical philosophy. Ryan Carter was offered a position as chief instructor at Outpost Harmony, but he declined, saying he was a field operator at heart and not suited for permanent teaching duties. Instead, he accepted a role as roving tactical advisor, traveling to different Coalition facilities to observe training and provide guidance. Lisa Grant took a permanent position at Outpost Harmony, her patience and teaching ability making her a natural instructor. The partnership between human and Coalition trainers began producing a new generation of warriors who thought differently about warfare. The Krell, who had precipitated this entire transformation with their attack on Outpost Vega, soon discovered that the Coalition's new capabilities made their traditional raiding tactics obsolete. A joint human-Vryn strike team infiltrated a Krell stronghold and extracted intelligence that led to the dismantling of their entire raiding network. The operation used tactics directly derived from Operation Darkfall, and it achieved total success with 0 coalition casualties. The message to hostile forces throughout the galaxy was clear. The coalition had evolved. 6 months after first contact, Ambassador Murray stood on the bridge of Horizon's Edge as the ship prepared to return to Earth. Captain Price was eager to see home again after the whirlwind of political and military changes. Colonel Morrison compiled reports that would reshape Earth's military doctrine based on lessons learned from coalition technology and interspecies cooperation. The mission that had begun with mockery and dismissal was ending in triumph and partnership. Before departing, Murray attended one final meeting with Chairman Kelvor in his private chambers. The reptilian leader served her a beverage from his homeworld, and they discussed the future of human coalition relations. Kelvor admitted that he had been skeptical of humanity's potential contributions, and that Ryan Carter's performance had forced him to reconsider assumptions the coalition had held for millennia. He asked Murray what Earth wanted from this partnership, beyond the obvious benefits of technology and trade. Murray's answer was thoughtful and revealed the deeper philosophy that had allowed humanity to succeed. She said that Earth wanted to contribute to something larger than itself, to bring its hard-won lessons from centuries of warfare and eventual peace to help the coalition become stronger and more just. Humanity had learned that survival required cooperation, that strength came from diversity, and that the best warriors were those who fought to protect rather than to conquer. If Earth could help the coalition embrace those principles, then humanity's place among the stars would be meaningful. Chairman Kelvor raised his glass in a toast to partnership and mutual growth. The gesture was formal, but the respect behind it was genuine. As Murray left the chambers and walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime toward her ship, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Earth had arrived as supplicants seeking acceptance, and was leaving as valued partners with proven capabilities. On Earth, at the SAS training facility in Hereford, a new class of recruits was beginning their journey through the grueling selection process that would determine if they had what it took to join the regiment.